Welcome to Fish University, your one-stop shop for the science behind fish management. It is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. I'm Wes Neal, your host. I'm an extension professor of fisheries and a researcher for Mississippi State University. Join me as I talk to researchers, managers, and landowners about the tools and science and the tricks of the trade for managing fish, water, and habitat. The goal is for you to have better fishing and a healthier aquatic ecosystem. So grab a notebook and the beverage of your choice and relax and enjoy Fish University. Welcome to Fish University. You know, fishing has come a long way since the days of tying a string to a stick. I think my first fish ever I caught was when I was a little toddler. My mother tied a dead fish she found along the riverbank to my fishing rod and let me reel it in. Technology's really evolved since those days. Back in the late 80s, we had the color selector. I don't know if that worked or not, to downward sonar and GPS. And now we've got the whole forward-facing sonar that's causing quite a ruckus in the fishing world. And technology's been a boon, and sometimes it's quite a controversy, as is the case with the forward-facing sonar. But now there are even AI-enabled computer programs that are out there that can help you fish, help you find fish, help you decide when to fish. One of these, the world's leading bass fishing app, is called BassForecast. This is downloadable on all platforms, and BassForecast is designed to help you catch more fish. So it tracks real-time weather data, it applies science and observations to predict where, when, and with what to fish with. BassForecast claims to increase your odds of catching more and bigger bass. To discuss this app and the science behind it, I've invited Mike Melman, who is the founder of BassForecast. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for inviting me, Wes.
I hope your weather's cooled off. I know here we've had our first fall-like weather just showed up. Don't get me wrong, I do not want winter. I hate winter, but I sure like it when we're not in the upper 90s all the time. And I think we're supposed to be in the upper 40s to low 50s the next couple of nights, which is a nice change.
You know, our app is actually picking up on a big transition from a summer pattern to a fall pattern as a result of that, because of the cooler nights.
You know, I was talking with a colleague just today about, we need to take Friday off and go fishing because the weather's too nice. The water's just perfect. It just feels like fishing and hunting weather out there. It doesn't feel like sitting in the office and stare at a computer weather at all. But thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because technology is really changing. I had Dr. Hal Schramm on here a number of episodes ago, and we talked about some of the fishing technology, things like the color selector and forward-facing sonar, but we never really got into apps. And apps are becoming part of our world. I mean, nobody can part with their cell phone. Everybody, you go anywhere and you see cell phones in the hands of people. Everything, your entire life is on the cell phone. So why shouldn't fishing be part of that? I'm just curious, I'm assuming you're an avid angler and that's where this is all coming from. So tell us a little bit about your background, your fishing passion, and how you got into this idea of building an app to help people fish.
It started, you talked about your grandmother tying a dead fish to your line. Now that's commitment. My dad, when he was a teenager, he grew up in what is now Croatia, but he told me stories of them throwing dynamite in the river because they needed to eat and the fish would float up. Now that's crude fishing, but my dad loved fishing. And I grew up in rural Illinois, fishing multi-species in Wisconsin, Minnesota. An exotic trip was to go to Canada and just really fell in love with it and bonding with my dad and my brothers and the whole outdoor experience, and I was a bit of a science geek. So, I latched on to In-Fisherman as soon as they came out in the 70s and worked for the Michigan DNR as a junior forest rangers during the summer. When I went to college, I thought I was going to be a fisheries biologist. Ended up after 2 years switching my major, but I never lost my love for, the biology, the environmental aspects of the sport, ecology, preserving the assets. And, as time went on, I'll skip the long, boring story of my career, but I ended up in 2013 owning a network of screens inside of coffee and bagel stores like Einstein Brothers Bagels, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. You've probably heard of some of these brands. You've probably been in some yourself. If you were in there in 2010, 2010 to 2015 and saw a TV screen. Me and my business partners actually owned that. We licensed weather feeds from AccuWeather. And one night over dinner with my AccuWeather counterpart, I just made a comment, a rather smart aleck comment, that his fishing forecast was inaccurate. And he called me back the next day and he said, I was thinking about what you said. Why is it inaccurate? And he wasn't a fisherman. So I said, Mike, would you find polar bears and rattlesnakes in the same area? He goes, no. I said, fish are cold-blooded animals. A thermal optimum for a bass is about 80 degrees, roughly, depending on whether it's southern, northern, smallmouth. Smallmouth's a little cooler, obviously. And a trout will die at that water temp. And he's like, really? Tell me more. So I told him a little bit more. A couple of days later, he calls me back. He says, that we've got 1.2 billion unique users a day worldwide between our website, our mobile app, and all of our licensing agreements. And Fishing Index is our number 2 looked at index. And I said, wow. A week later, he calls me back. He says, I got approval to develop some software. And Wes, when you talk about apps, really, this is just a vehicle, right? An app is not a product. An app is just a portal to something. We could, the value of the product is just like any other piece of electronics. It's the engineering, the research, the development. When you pay, you reference forward-facing sonar, $2,000 for forward-facing sonar, that the metal that it comes in doesn't cost that, probably cost $50. What you're paying for is exactly what we're doing. But isn't it smarter to just allow people to access it here rather than saying, hey, send BassForecast $50 and we'll send you a device that you can carry around with you? It doesn't make any sense. So this is just logical delivery mechanism. If the App Store and Google Play decided that, hey, we're not going to host apps anymore, people could subscribe to BassForecast in other ways. So think of it more as an electronics tool that's engineered, designed, research. But that's how it got started, Wes. It got started with my love for bass fishing and genuinely wanting to help anglers and really help myself. It was annoying to be on the other side of, you should have been here yesterday too often. When I didn't have much time to burn, I could only get out once a month. Invariably, I would time it wrong. I'd be right after that major cold front in February. And it's like, oh man, yesterday we caught 30. Today was a struggle to catch 5. If I can fish every day or every week, that doesn't bother me. But when time is limited, I think anglers do want to stack the odds in their favor. And that's how we got started.
So when you're saying we, so I'm assuming that the we in that is the
my business
AccuWeather colleague.
Well, yeah. That was my idea, and I'm the fisherman, but without his expertise in digital technology and suggesting that a mobile app would be a good way to go about it. And in fact, part of our research, Wes, was we looked at who else is doing fishing forecasts. And back then it was an absolute joke. It was 3 companies in Eastern Europe. Then when you look deeper, they were just sweatshops taking hot, trendy ideas and putting lipstick on a pig, taking a weather forecast and calling it a fishing forecast and having some fishing graphics. They had no indexing to a preferred temperature range of any species of fish, none of that. And to this day, we're still one of the only, if not the only company doing that, being that scientific.
And that's always been my problem with the Salooner tables is what you said. It's how do you take a single metric and apply it to all species? Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, crappie, trout, they're all going to behave differently at different temperatures. When the water temperature is 40 degrees, those species are going to behave quite differently from one another. So how do you say, well, this is going to be a great fishing day for which species, So
you don't. It's like anything in life. You follow the proven principles, and you're going to do better than the norm if you do that. But not every day is going to be perfect. And when you mentioned earlier in the podcast that we claim to improve catch rates. We actually hired 5 or was it 6? 5 or 6 guides. I know one was Lake Minnetonka up north in Minnesota. One was at Lake Champlain in Vermont. One was in the chain of lakes in Florida. One was at Lake Fork. One was at Clear Lake. And there was another one in the Mid-South somewhere. I think it was Lake Wheeler. And for a full season, and 5 of those guys still don't know who we are. For a full season, they reported number of bass, number of hours, and number of anglers that were on the water, because I knew to get an accurate reading, we needed someone that fished the same body of water and was a good angler. Because sometimes our customers say, well, your rating was great and we didn't do well. And it's like, well, that's one day. One day doesn't make a trend, right? Could have been following a tournament, could have been an ecological disaster on, like, who knows? And after a full season, we correlated it to our ratings. When our rating was an 8 or higher, which means the environmental conditions are very conducive to being an active bite, the average catch rate for the entire group was 305% above the norm, which I knew we were onto something then. And when it was a 4 or lower, which are very difficult conditions, the average catch rate was 60% below the norm. So yeah, it's already been proven by what I consider, and being a stats minor at Northwestern, I'm not bad with stats. Highly statistically valid survey. It cost a lot of money and took a lot of time.
Yeah, I would argue, just based on how you described that there's a 60% change in catch rates between good days and bad days, and your app predicted those days.
Actually, it's far greater than that, because the catch rate at 8 and above was 305% above the norm, and it was 60% below at 4 or below.
So what you're saying, that the app shows the best days to fish, but that doesn't incorporate the human decision-making process into the
No, it doesn't.
So if the angler says, well, I'm going to use the app, and I'm going to not fish on the day that's a 4, but I am going to fish on the day that's an 8. So overall, the return to the individual may be a lot higher than that, because they're eliminating poor fishing days and only going out on high quality days.
Well, that's why we use the guides that fish blind. They didn't have BassForecast. They didn't know who was sponsoring the study. You're absolutely right. You got to make sure that your data is not skewed.
So I'm not saying your data is skewed. I'm saying that your data is conservative.
Probably, yeah, because average anglers aren't as good at adapting to changing conditions like guides are, who are in touch with their home water. But, let's back up just for a minute for the listeners. So the rating system is 1 to 10, okay? And anyone listening to this who bass fishes will understand fall transition is a great example. Pre-spawn's an even better example. During the pre-spawn, fisheries biologists generally agree that bass will start to move up when the water temp starts to creep north of 40 and get up to somewhere between 45 and 50. They'll start to move into pre-spawn positions, right? Now that's in the springtime when the amount of daylight starts increasing too. So there's a photolight period that comes into play too, right? I mean, that as a biologist. So if it's, 3 days in a row in February in the South of 80 degrees or more, one day is not enough, but 3 or 4 days in a row, that some big pre-spawn females are going to move up. The big dogs always move up first. The wind speed's good. There's overcast conditions. A front's coming. That front comes through and the temperatures drop into the 50s and the bite shuts down. It gets a lot more difficult, right? When it's dead calm, post-frontal. And, like Bob Lusk said, who's, by the way, getting inducted into the Freshwater Hall of Fame. I talked to him last week about this. He asked me, Mike, what's the master factor in metabolism? And I said, temperature trend. He goes, yeah, how'd you know that? I said, well, it's my job to know it. I've been doing this for 7 years, aside from fishing pressure or anything else, right? So if the water's trending toward their thermal optimum, they're just like a human. Without our caves and air conditioning and heating, we'd be most comfortable and most active at what, Wes? Somewhere between 74 and 80, right? So that's the premise of our algorithm, when it's trending toward or trending away. And what we want to do, Wes, is, so much information in the fishing industry is what happened yesterday. What worked yesterday? What worked last year? Well, last year, the weather pattern could have been different on the same day. And anglers need help in deciding when to go. Now, some people say, well, I'll go whenever I can. Well, that's great. But, if I give you a heads up that 10 days from now is going to be epic, can you juggle your schedule around? Maybe, most likely. What if I tell you tomorrow, Wes? What if I say tomorrow's an awesome day? You can't miss it. Fish are on fire right now. It's too late for you to probably juggle around your schedule.
I don't know. I'd find a way.
You're a lucky man. You're a lucky man. Yeah, I passed up on an unbelievable opportunity this past year with Ben Milliken, where he caught 5 10-pounders in one day. And it was a lake I turned him on to. And he said, well, I can go tomorrow. And I'm like, I can't. And I should have.
So now you've sort of mentioned how the app works.
And that's half of it. The other half is, because about 2 years into this, our customers were saying, hey, Mike, I can only go this Saturday. And you say it's going to be a really tough day. So what advice do you have for me? And we tried, Wes, using the same scientific principles of let's use industry best practices. So we did a lot of research from a wide variety of vetted sources, all of whom I can name them off now. I mean, Bassmaster, MLF, Wire to Fish, books, magazines, In Fisherman, and determined, we know what makes a pattern, right? It's location, presentation, and bait. So for each of the 9 bass seasons, how many bass seasons are there? There's 9: winter, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, early summer, early fall transition, fall, and then into winter, right? I went through that kind of fast, but for each of those seasons, in a condition where the bass are more active than normal, and this is where AI comes into play, right? What are the top 5 baits? Now, people have individual opinions. You may love throwing a jig, and you're always going to say a jig. And another person may love throwing a crankbait, and they're always going to say a crankbait. But it's what is the consensus number one answer, right? If you were to survey 1,000 knowledgeable bass anglers, that is our methodology for what is the top 5 baits in pre-spawn active, pre-spawn inactive, spawn active, spawn inactive, and then what are the top lake location structures? We don't know if there's a sunken tree or bus or whatever. Is it a flat? Is it a point? Is it a creek channel? That's what we mean by structure. And then what should the presentation speed be? Slow, medium, or fast? And those 3 elements comprise a pattern. So what we wanted to do was help anglers figure out the bite faster and adapt to changing weather. And even pros, that's their number one regret, that they didn't adapt to the changing weather, because it takes a long time for the water to for the air to affect the water. So it can be complicated. And that's one of the things our algorithm does. It uses a temperature time lag to make adjustments. Anyway, it's kind of a long thing, but.
You mentioned, the idea that with a few warm days, fish move shallow in the springtime. I heard another podcast that you had recorded where you were telling a story about the Bassmasters Classics in Tennessee, and that your app was predicting, a shallow bite. And can you tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was great. I mean, that was a great example. So it was 2 years ago, the Bassmaster Classic in Tennessee. The conditions were leading up to it were quite cold. And the prevailing wisdom was these fish are going to be deep all tournament long. And our app was predicting truly a winter bite until the day the tournament began, and it said pre-spawn. Now, that doesn't mean every fish in the lake is suddenly going to move up en masse. Just that, be aware that a pre-spawn movement could be occurring. I'm not going to mention his name. He's a great angler, super famous. I was having lunch with his agent, and he says, so-and-so doesn't agree. They're going to be deep all tournament long. And I said, okay. I mean, it's not my opinion. It's just the science of water and air and bass. So sure enough, when the tournament ended, 4 of the top 5 place winners switched to a pre-spawn pattern, and we're catching really big females in that were shallower than 90% of the field thought. We ended up signing that gentleman as a spokesperson for our company. And, the CEO of Bassmaster, who's just a wonderful guy. I mean, I've been subscribing to Bassmaster forever. They license our cylinder tables. Chase Anderson, he was there, and he's like, man, you guys nailed it. So I'm not saying we nailed it every time, but we're pretty darn close. And where we're off, we learn from it, and we adapt and we adjust the algorithm. But that's what people pay us for, to understand and to try to adapt. And really, you talk about technology on the water, it can kind of ruin the experience, even a phone. It's like, I just want to fish and have a good time. And we were even thinking about running an ad campaign that we're the only app you don't need on the water. Because really, ours is like just a planning trip. It just helps you understand how the weather's affecting the bite.
It's a scheduling device.
Scheduling sometimes. Hey, look, if I'm going to go Saturday and I'm itching to get out and BassForecast says it's going to be a terrible rating, I'm still going. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at those adapted patterns, and I'm going to say, I was thinking about 3 of those top 5 baits, and I hadn't thought about the other 2. I'm going to take those 2. That is what we hear actually from a lot of pros, including the number 2 and the number 4 ranked bass angler in the world. Both told me that I'll look at your app 7 to 10 days before the tournament begins. And if there's something I hadn't thought of, I'll pack it. I can tell you that a few times it saved my ass and put me in the money. So, we work for everybody. And if you think we don't work for you, then you're probably not a top 10 angler. It's a fine line between being stubborn and being confident.
So you mentioned some of the app's features already, but did you call these the professional features, the pro features, or something like that? The bite prediction's obviously the big one. Should I go out on Saturday or should I mow the grass instead? But you also, as I said, you give lure techniques, tips for the conditions, location, depth, even. How does all that come into play? Is that just based on history?
So the depth, Wes, is a perceived depth based on the generalized map that we have now. If you read any magazine or read any article online and they're trying to illustrate where pre-spawn locations might be, you'll see that it's a bathymetric map with illustrative, but you don't know whether those lines mean 1 foot differences or 10-foot differences. It depends on the lake. So depth is relative, right? A lake that has a maximum depth of 15 feet, the fish are going to be at different depths than a lake that has depths to 100 feet. But relatively speaking, where on these contour lines are you going to most likely to find the fish? So it's illustrative, and half the fishing in the U.S. is done on unmarked waterways. So we wanted it to work for either a large mapped lake or a private pond, either one.
So you mentioned lake maximum depth dependent, but also I'm assuming water clarity comes into play here. Very clear lake, they might be quite deeper than a lake that's got a nice phytoplankton bloom.
We where do you live at in Mississippi?
Starkville, Mississippi.
Okay, Starkville.
So not near any reservoir you're going to know.
Okay, well, let me use where I live then. If I go a little bit west of here, Possum Kingdom is pretty clear lake. Now, there are a couple of farm ponds out near there that are murky. The app doesn't know that, right? It just knows you're fishing in this area and here's the weather pattern. So you still got to figure out some of that on the fly. Now, we're going to be adding certain manual inputs. The nice thing about the app is it's so easy to use, even a caveman can use it. I wish we could use that in advertising, but I think Geico has that. Really, you just put it. Some of these apps are so complicated. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. But with ours, as you probably noticed, you just put in your location and then you scroll around. That's it. And that takes a heck of a lot of time and money and engineering. We use the same firm that developed the NASA apps for companies like Nike, Under Armour, Walmart. So, when it looks simple, sometimes our customers say, well, this looks super simple. It must not be very effective. Well, it's, a Rolex looks simple too, and it's accurate. So to make the complex simple is very challenging. But water clarity is something that would have to be a manual input because you could be fishing two different bodies of water in the same zip code, county, and one could be a deep rocky lake and the other could be a shallow murky lake. And we don't know that.
Or that you could fish the same lake 2 different years and have clear period versus a really turbid period.
Sure.
Just due to weather patterns that happened a month ago. So Hurricane Milton's about to hit Florida today. I imagine those lakes are going to look quite different tomorrow than they would have at this time last year.
Oh, man. In fact, we were supposed to have a meeting with one of the guys from MLF today that lives in Tampa, and he's all boarded up.
So, Mike, we started off talking about how different species have different thermal requirements. Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass would be the obvious comparison we could throw out there. Does your app accurately predict smallmouth bass behavior like it does with largemouth?
Well, they're certainly much, much closer to largemouth than trout and many other species. So it has been pretty accurate. Now, we are going to add a smallmouth toggle. And Wes, you're part of that group that I'm in. In fact, I think I'm the only non-fisheries biologist where I've been surveying you and the others on what is the thermal optimum for a northern strain, a southern strain, and a smallmouth. So we want to add that feature to the app, right? And interestingly, I'm getting similar bands, but different numbers. And Bob Lusk, who's the guy that's being inducted in Texas, he thinks the number's even a little bit lower, which might explain why some of these California mountain lakes produce such monstrous bass. The water temp is ideal for them to feed year round. Plus, they're stocking trout there, which is, has a high lipid profile. And yeah, they can put on weight fast. But you can put on weight awfully fast when you're happy and feeding 365 days a year.
But certainly, yeah. I mean, it's kind of, California has sort of what we call a Mediterranean climate. It's the perfect world. Now, that being said, I built my career largely doing research in Puerto Rico. Largemouth bass there have near optimal temperatures year round. Temperatures might get down, I'm sorry, I'm using Celsius here, but they might get down in the wintertime to 23, 24 degrees Celsius, which is what, upper 70s maybe? And then in the summertime, they might push 30, which might be upper 80s.
Well, that would put water temp near the 80 mark year round,
Yeah.
which is pretty ideal. So what's the biggest bass out of Puerto Rico?
That's the thing, is you would think that these fish would be growing monstrously large there, but there we experience something I've always called the live fast, die young lifestyle. Essentially, the bass grow really fast to adult size, which is 12 inches. They begin to spawn. They spawn every few days for 6, 7, 8 months of the year, spawn themselves to death, put all their energy into spawning, and they die by about age 3 or 4. There, it's pretty rare to see a fish bigger than 3 or 4 pounds. Every now and then we'll catch one, and I don't know what makes it different. That'll be 6, 7, 8 pounds. And the biggest fish I've ever seen there might have been 11 or 12 pounds. I think the island record's 16, but I never saw that fish.
So it has the potential. Well, maybe those fish that are dying, that are spawning year round, are listening to some sexy music. Gets them in the mood.
They play a lot of Barry White. But no, it's interesting because for my PhD, I did research on what we call the bioenergetics of those fish. If you run a basic bioenergetics model for largemouth bass, it predicts that largemouth bass in Puerto Rico should be pushing 30 pounds in about 4 or 5 years. It fails because it's just such an unusual situation that conditions are perfect. But that's not at all what happens. In fact, I plotted the record weight by state and by country in cases where the largemouth bass has been stocked outside of its native range. And so record weight versus latitude. And we found that the world record bass, or the biggest bass in the world, seemed to come from somewhere around South Georgia, which is
the 30th parallel, like Frank Griffin said.
By the way, which is where the world record bass came from. It's the 30th parallel. When you start getting further and further south, they start reproducing more and more and more, and their growth rates seem to go down. They burn more energy, and other factors. To me, it's always seemed like bass kind of need a winter. They need that cold water period to reset. Usually it's in the cold period when they're not growing is when they're starting to put on the gametes to reproduce. And when you start getting into the tropical situations, that seems to all break down, and the fish they're temperate species. They just don't know how to behave in the tropics, essentially. When you look at places like Japan, California, and Georgia, which is where the big fish come from, those are specialized climates. There's still a winter period. They can still reset.
Mm-hmm. But it's a shorter winter period, huh?
And they've got that optimal growing season for the rest of the year. And in the case of California, for example, it's not getting, here in Mississippi in the summertime, it's not uncommon to see water temperatures that are pushing mid 90s. That's pretty stressful on a fish. In fact, largemouth bass tend to lose weight when they get above the thermal maximum, and then eventually they'll die.
Making a note here, reset with a short winter is ideal. Puerto Rico, if they're not resetting, they're burning too much energy, spawning all the time.
This is true in Florida, too.
I was just going to bring that up, yep.
When you get down to South Florida, you don't see the giant fish that you see. Okeechobee produces a lot of nice bass, but how many 15, 16, 17, 18 pounders have you ever seen come out of Okeechobee? They're all 8, 9, 10, 11
Yeah,
pounds.
and they can spawn from November through, June down there at Okeechobee. And growing up north, I remember, it seems like the further north you get, the more concentrated the spawning period.
It is.
In Texas, oh, great. I would love whatever research you have on that. Because in Texas, I've seen eggs in females as early as January. If the weather's warm enough, we'll see some beds in early February. And then you'll also see beds still hanging around in May. Now, when I'm up north, because the seasons move along faster, I think, the spawning season is like 2 to 3 weeks. And every dang fish in the lake is spawning. And by the way, a lot of times that's closed season to protect the species because there's just too many, too concentrated. And if you pull them all off the beds, you're going to totally rob the gene pool.
They develop those eggs, they drop them all at once, and then they get on with the business of growing. Whereas, further south, what happens is we have the largemouth bass in Puerto Rico and probably other more southern areas. The bass are what we call group synchronous spawners, which means that at any given time within their ovaries, they've got different batches of eggs that are ready to go. And we did a bootstrap analysis one time that suggested bass were capable of spawning 1 to 2 times a week every day for like 8 months. That's a lot. That's a lot of effort going into reproduction.
1 to 2 times a what?
Yeah, I think it was every 3 to 4 days during the entire spawning season. Now, I don't know if they actually do that.
2 times a week.
Yes, potentially. They could do that.
For 8 months.
Every time the water level increased in our reservoirs, bass went on the nest, anytime from about December to about June. And then we saw fall spawning occasionally, sometimes in September, October. Now, if you go further north, what's really interesting is kind of like the ops, well, kind of like deer. Deer body size increases the further north you go because they're a warm-blooded animal. With fish, body size tends to increase the further south you go to a point, with the point being about the 30th parallel. But with largemouth bass, if you get to southern Florida and further south, these fish aren't living very long. The world's longest lived largemouth bass that we've ever aged, I think, came from New York. I want to say it was 23 or 24 years old.
Yep, I read that in Frank Griffin's book. Winnipesaukee, New York, or something like that. It was over 22 years old.
So, but I would imagine your Texas fish, I think Tom Lang told me the ShareLunker program, I think most of their fish are averaging 9, 10 years old, something like that. And I think the oldest fish he's seen might be 12 or 13. Those are the biggest of the big fish. Those are the biggest females that are being caught. They're not living as long in the South. They're growing a lot faster, but they're not living as long. So I'm not exactly sure how we got on that tangent, but water temperature makes a big difference, but not just degree growing days like we talk about with plants, but also it seems like that reset is important.
And it probably slows down their metabolism, which is why they're living longer. Seems like animals with slower metabolism, like turtles, live the longest.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Fish University. Do you have a question or a topic for the podcast? If so, you can email me at Wes, that's W-E-S, .Neal, that's N-E-A-L, at Mississippi State, that's MSSTATE.edu. Or instead, please visit the Fish University Facebook page. On the Facebook page, you will find useful articles, videos, stories, and other information, as well as updates on upcoming podcasts. Not to mention, you can send me a private message with questions or suggestions. Just search Fish University and look for our colorful logo. And please follow the Fish University page. We need your support. Now back to the show.
You said you've got some big names on. I don't want you to drop any names if you're not allowed to, but I'm assuming a lot of the professional anglers are using this now.
Well, we're not exactly sure how many. We know by surveying our customer base that we have 80,000 tournament. Well, it's probably more like 100,000 now in our database.
These are anglers that fish tournaments at some point, at some level.
Now, we sponsor Alton Jones Jr., who is so consistent. I mean, he's been in the top 5. I think he was number 2 years in a row, Angler of the Year. Now, that's consistent. I think the only guy ranked above him is Jacob Wheeler. We don't sponsor him, but we started sponsoring Alton long before he became famous. And we did that because I could see that he was going to become famous. Why? Because he's very scientific. People that have longevity in this industry, Rick Klun, KVD, they're amateur scientists. They're trying to, they're actually paying more attention to you, Wes, than they are to other anglers. They'll pay attention to other anglers on techniques, but, Steve Alexander, the president of private water fishing, he says, watch what happens when a fisheries biologist speaks versus another angler. When another angler speaks, they're like, yeah, this is the chatter. When a fisheries biologist speaks, the real professional bass anglers will be like, they're enthralled because they want to understand the behavior of the fish. So, we sponsor some anglers and I talk to a lot of them, but really we put as much or more stock into what we learn from biologists, what we learn from water engineers. How long does it take the top 10 feet of the water column to come to equilibrium with average air day and nighttime air temps? I can't reveal that on this podcast because we spend a lot of time and money developing that. That's what we can learn from the anglers is techniques and things like that. But once you have figured out what bass season and what mood, the techniques, you can Bass Chat GPT, Bass AI. I mean, everyone's rushing to try to figure that out. At the end of the day, as long as the inputs are valuable, the outputs are valuable, but a lot of it's garbage in, garbage out. There's a couple of fishing apps that are super popular and their own users are lying. So, if you say, well, our AI for this app is saying this, well, your users are lying because they want to mislead everyone into what they're actually using. How could you tell when a bass angler is lying about what bait he used when his lips are moving? So to me, that's just garbage. It looks good to an investor. Oh, wow, they're using AI. Yeah, but, everyone's claiming I caught a bass on an earthworm. So
You might not be sponsoring these other anglers, but I bet they're using your app. They're just keeping it quiet.
Well, we are tournament compliant, which is a huge deal because, the space is kind of crowded with spot sharing and bragging apps. There is no bragging in BassForecast, none. We don't have social. People are gonna, when they catch a big fish, they're gonna put it on their Instagram and Facebook. For an app to think they're gonna create a social community is interesting, but it hasn't happened. And spot sharing is also, something that works well in certain countries and with certain species, but bass anglers are very protective because when they do share a spot and the next day everyone's on it and it's over for them, they've learned to shut their mouths. So yeah, there's none of that in our app. It's a predictive algorithm based on weather patterns. So it is tournament compliant. We've already cleared that with MLF and BASS.
What makes it tournament compliant?
What you can't do prior to a tournament, a legitimate large tournament, is gather information and intel on the lake from any local source. Doesn't matter whether it's a software, a post, a human being, right? In fact, Alton Jones he's got such high integrity. There've been a few times where he's like, I said, hey, good luck at Fork. I was thinking, and he goes, Mike, stop right there. I can't hear what you're thinking. Now, what your app is thinking is different. It's no different than a weather app. It's a predictive algorithm. It's not a person's opinion. It's a predictive algorithm based on a giant database. It's not lake specific. In other words, but what I was going to tell him was lake specific. He can't hear lake specific information. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Our algorithm is not lake specific, which sometimes actually works out quite well because during that tournament, he actually won that tournament. Him and the other top 5 place winners, 4 of the top 5 baits they used were baits we recommended, and they were baits that I know for a fact, because I use guides out there, weren't using. So sometimes people can get so infatuated with their local lake and what worked yesterday, they don't open their mind to what's going on in the environment or what the biology says. Yeah.
I mean, you and I are the same way. I'm sure if you go out on the lake and you're doing one thing and it's working for you and you come back the next day, you're going to fish a long time doing that until you realize it's not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it was so good yesterday, why would I change it? I know this works. I wanted to say this earlier, when you're talking about how a lot of the best anglers are amateur scientists. I bet it's a lot like what I tell people pond management. I said pond management is science, but it's also an art. And they're also artists. The best fishermen are artists because not only can they take the science, but then they can see things and envision things that other people can't. So how do you factor the art into the app?
I don't know. That is you're the first person that's asked me that. And I'll tell you, because I love doing it too. And I'm getting the tingles now because I'm thinking about some experiences I had personally. Like, when I went down to El Salto first time, a guide says, we're throwing 8-inch white Senkos, giant white Senkos, 8-inch. Tilapia, injured tilapia. I said, okay, 8-inch white Senko. I said, a finesse fish, which is a giant fluke. Remember the old Lunker City Sluggos? They made a bait called a finesse fish. And I said, they got a 7. They don't make an 8, but they make a 7-inch, bone white. So I got some of those, and I played around with the right hooks and found that an 8-aught wide gap, slightly weighted hook, like if you just twitched it, it would fall. So it almost looked like a Senko, but it had more of a natural profile. And that's the art. That's the art, right? Like, so if we're saying a Senko and we're saying slow, we know that people are saying, okay, what if I did this slow that was similar but slightly different? Because as you know, fish learn. They don't have, reasoning abilities, but but they're a creature of nature. If you get stung by a yellow bee, you're going to avoid a yellow bee next time, and you get stung by an orange one, and then you're like, oh, well, they both look like a bee. The third time, nothing that looks like a bee you're going to get stung by, right? Anyway, to make a long story short, slayed him on that, beat the guide. Now, the guide was awesome. He led us to the fish. He did everything, but he's like, man, leave me the rest of the year. Could you leave me? Because everyone was throwing the same thing, and it was similar, but just different enough to fool the fish that had already been stung.
Mm-hmm.
I did the same thing in the Amazon. Went down to the Amazon. I've been there twice. Guide says they like to eat, and I had researched they like to eat small piranha, and they all throw these hair jigs. You ever been down there?
No, I'm not. Well, not to the Amazon fishing. No, I want to go.
So generally, the most fun bite is the big topwaters they throw. The wood choppers and.
Yeah.
But when you can't get them to come up, they'll throw these hair jigs, and it's crazy, Wes. Sometimes you get bit and you reel it in, and it's sliced off like a pair of scissors did it, and that's a piranha. So I went and bought these Joe Bucher musky spoons that were gold and silver and orange and reddish. They looked just like a baby piranha, but they were much bigger. They looked like a baby piranha. These hair jigs are smaller. And we got in an area, and the guide says there's big ones in this area. So I tied that spoon on, and he's looking at me, waving his finger. No, don't throw that. They're never going to hit it. I said, just humor me. I'm going to toss it out there. So I tossed it out there. First cast, it looked like a bathtub exploded. 23-pound peacock, which at the time was only 3 pounds off the world record. And it was the largest fish anyone caught in the trip. 20 people for a week-long trip. And of course, guess where I left my spoons when I left them with him. But that is the art, right? But the art is also based on biology. Hey, they're eating piranha. What can I do that matches it? Or,
yeah, exactly.
They're eating tilapia and they're falling slow. Everyone's using Senkos. What looks similar, right? That's the fun part for sure. And I don't know how we bake that into the app. We've thought about having, and we will eventually, advanced techniques, advanced features, But for now, people who get the basics, they derivate on it on their own. But at least we're pointing them in the right direction of these are the kinds of baits and the kinds of presentations that the weather pattern and the environmental conditions dictate, like Dr. Keith Young, who wrote Knowing Bass, said, bass is a bass is a bass. It's biologically wired to do what it's going to do. So what we're doing is we're kind of pointing people in the direction of here's what this animal that's biologically wired to do is going to do on that day. And if you want to derivate, go have at it. But if you want to know what the top 5 baits are, here they are.
So when does Peacock Bass Forecast come out?
Yeah, right now we have a very small target market of southern Florida. It would cost us a lot more than what we could generate in revenue.
Did you fly into Manaus and fish the Rio Negro? Is that what you were on?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, well, once we got to Manaus, we took another small plane up to Barcelos, which is the last airport west, and then we went even further deeper. It was really cool. Yeah, we got into places where we didn't see other boats and fishermen for days.
At some point in time, I want to do that. I've done a lot of research with peacock bass, both the butterfly peacock bass, which is what they have in Florida, and then a little bit with the cichlid temensis, which is the one you were catching, the big speckled peacock bass.
Well, there's speckled and there's 3-bar and the butterflies. The butterflies are smaller, but I can tell you that they're extremely delicious. And you got to get them in before the river dolphins get them.
Did you have a lot of problems with river dolphins?
I love Nat Geo, right?
Yeah.
But when we were flying into Manaus, I saw very, very, very little deforestation. I know we've got problems with deforestation in the Amazon, but it's more toward the coast. So yeah, tons of wildlife. We saw tons of wildlife. Hundreds of macaws every day, scarlet, blue macaws. We wanted to see an anaconda. We didn't see that. Some pretty big crocodiles. Yeah, and river dolphins, and they follow the fishing boats, and they know that when a peacock is caught and it's tired, it's easier to catch and eat because they hunt them.
Yeah, I have problems with the bottlenose dolphins fishing the coast for snapper and things like that. They'll hone in on you when you're on on a wreck or whatever you're fishing. And, once they're there, you can't get a fish back down. I mean, they're faster than the fish. The fish can't make it to the river.
And we were in 3 feet of water, Wes, and they're coming up under our boat, looking up at us.
And are these pink dolphins?
They're pink. Yeah, they're pink, and they're everywhere down there. They're certainly not endangered from west of Manaus.
There was I think a British woman that was pretty severely injured by one of those earlier this year. I don't know what happened. I mean, I think it was more of an infection than the injury itself that got her, but she was attacked by one or had some kind of encounter with a pink dolphin there and was in pretty bad shape when she flew back. I don't know whatever happened with that story, but
of course, I'm not a marine biologist, but I understand that they are not friendly creatures. They are not friendly like saltwater dolphins. They're a little nastier.
Now I've got to go fishing in Manaus.
It's a great experience. It's hot for sure, and it's humid.
Well, you and I, we live in Mississippi and Texas. It can't be that much worse, is it?
True. It's now when we say hot, as it gets to 108 here in July and August. Now it's not 108 there, but it's 97, 98 with 85, 90% humidity all day, every day, and it doesn't cool down much at night. So it's a beat down.
Still sounds like fun to me. So we told people about BassForecast. It works. People catch fish with it. You can't really give us your special sauce and tell us exactly how it works because that's all confidential. But why don't you tell people where they can find it, what it costs, how to download it?
Sure. You can download it on Apple or Google. I think we're a little under $3 a month, like everything else, paid annually. So it's $29.99 a year, $29.95 a year. And when you subscribe to Pro, you get the $20 Tackle Warehouse gift card. So it's good on anything in the store, even sale event items. So it's same as cash. So really net, you're talking about less than $10 a year, which is a heck of a deal. And that's for 24/7 access for 365 days.
Is Pro a little more?
That's Pro. Yeah, I know, right? It's inexpensive. And it's funny how sometimes people say, well, I don't pay for apps. Well, you get what you pay for. Someone's got to pay. We don't barrage our customers with ads in the app. That's the only way you can make money. Again, I think changing attitudes, making people understand that, this is an engineered product. It's helping people understand that. And our customers that have Pro, they're like, wow, this is awesome. It's interesting. And, we all know Frank Griffin. In his book and others' research, Tom Mann, who I'm sure you've heard of, the gentleman in Florida who caught 1,000 bass over 10 pounds, Doug Hannon, that big fish are more sensitive to weather. It makes sense. The apex predator is going to feed when the conditions are right for them, not just because you're putting something in their face. We have so many lunkers being reported on epic days. An epic day is, fronts coming in, the wind speed's picking up, the predators are going on the prowl, the big dogs. And so I think that's probably the best value proposition we have for having Pro is the alerts that we give people. I mean, I personally, as the founder of the company, I got an alert 3 years ago that it was going to be an epic day, July 28th. And it had been over 100 degrees for 2 weeks in a row. And I was like, well, I don't know why, Then I looked at the weather and it's like, oh, it's going to drop down into the upper 80s, lower 90s for 3 days in a row. It's going to rain a little bit. Yeah, that's going to get them happy and moving because they've been, the water temp was up and creeping up into the 90s. And sure enough, I had enough notice, 10 days to take a day out to rearrange my schedule and go. And I caught my PB and I just had a phenomenal outing. So that's a value proposition, that having 100 features isn't as valuable as having a treasure map, right? If I sell you a treasure map, here's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You only need one feature to make it worthwhile. So I think, that we're not going to work every trip, but if someone goes 10, 15 times a year, we create a bit of magic on 2 of those trips, or we save their day on a couple, then we've done our job. That is what we're hoping for when people install us, which is why we don't do short-term deals anymore, because it's just one-time test is just completely grossly inaccurate. Someone that uses us a while starts to figure out, okay, yeah, I'm finding some things that I'm doing differently, doing better, or a bait that I didn't think about that caught me my PB, something.
And let's be honest, some people just can't fish. I mean, some people,
True,
they're going to have bad days. They go
True.
out there and it's pure chance, but there's sometimes when it doesn't matter. You can have every tool in the world and you're not going to get the fish to bite for you.
Most of the time you can figure out fishing pressure is an important variable, right? If it's an excellent day and they're not biting, I've usually found that there's some sort of algae bloom going on that we couldn't account for. There's almost always an explanation. When there's not, it happens. It does. It's a head scratcher.
Yeah, cyanobacterial bloom going on. I mean, there could be toxins in the water you don't know about. Fish could be stressed out. Could be an oxygen problem. Could be all kinds of things going on. I have one more question for you. We haven't talked at all about the Lunker Club. Tell us about that.
So we started this a couple of years ago, and it's sponsored by Lose and Strike King. They've just been great partners, the folks at Rather Outdoors. They what they do is they provide a $50 gift card and a rod and reel to the monthly winner of anyone that catches a big bass using BassForecast. A big bass in the north, we set a standard of 6 pounds. In the south, 8 pounds. For a child, it's 5 pounds, but really if I see a 5-year-old with a 3-pounder, they're getting in. We do make a few value judgments here and there. So yeah, you submit your catch and tell us how you catch it. We're also gathering some data for research purposes, and as you know, coordinating with Texas, and we'll coordinate with any state agencies that want to coordinate with us. And then hopefully we make some of these people famous. We publish their name and picture on our website. We send an email out. A lot of them go on our social posts. We have almost 1 million customers now. So, and they have fun with it. They get a $50 gift card, and a monthly winner wins a Lose Rod and Reel in addition to the $50 gift card. So we probably induct about, in the off season, maybe 20, 30 people a month. And during peak season, we'll have months where we're inducting 50 people. It's a lot of big fish being caught.
A lot of overlap with programs like the Share Lunker.
Well, that's why we're sharing data with Texas. Actually, surprising, I see a lot of the names of people that submitted there also submitting in our app. But we have customers all over the nation. We have almost as many up north as we do in the south. And that's where it gets tough, Wes, when we had someone in the south catch a 12-pounder and then someone in the north caught a 7-pounder. But you look at, 7-pounder in North Dakota and the state record's 8. Mm-hmm. As a percent of the state record, that one's a far greater accomplishment than the 12-pounder in Texas. So that might be the monthly winner. We try to be as fair as possible and spread the love around, because if we didn't, someone from the south would always win.
I'm sure you can come up with an algorithm for that.
We generally, I've just kind of divulged it. It's percent of the state record kind of is the tiebreaker. There's some fish that are really obvious.
Well, do you have any other parting thoughts or anything you'd like the audience to know before we wrap up?
No, I'm happy with what we're doing. It makes me feel really good when people share what I call hero stories. I find a lot of people, and tournament anglers too, like Scott Martin says to me, I don't use that, but I use BassForecast when I'm going to take my wife or friends. I'll go out any day, but I want them to have a great experience. I know it improves their odds. So hearing that from school teachers that, I took these 3 kids fishing. We didn't do very well. I got BassForecast. I took them out. They all caught fish. I'm their hero. To me, that's the feel good with what we're doing. Is sure, people win tournaments with it, but making other people happy is an even better feel good. And helping people have good days more often than not on their highly valuable free time, hardworking people that can only maybe get out once a month. They don't have a lifetime of learning on the water to become good. They need some sort of guidance, and some of them can't afford guides all the time. So, giving them good guidance and helping them, that's what motivates me.
Well, if you ever need a partner for crappie forecast, let me know. I'm willing to jump into that and provide all the data we can get for you.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a highly likely next species for us.
Yeah, it seems like the next logical one for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this. It's been enlightening. I appreciate everything that you're sharing with us. If folks want to check out the app, please do so. It's a very popular app. It's the #1 bass fishing app in the world, right?
Correct.
So again, thanks for coming on, and thanks everybody for joining us today. This has been Fish University. I hope to see you next time, and we'll have another interesting discussion. Take care.
Thanks, Wes.
Fish University is hosted by Wes Neal, an employee of Mississippi State University Extension Service and a faculty member in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. This podcast is part of the Natural Resources University network of podcasts. Funding was provided by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you have questions or suggestions, please go to the Extension website at extension.mississippistate.edu. Click on Natural Resources and then select the Fisheries tab in the drop-down menu. Or you can email me at wes.neal@msstate.edu.